Hi guys, and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. We help Muslims and non-Muslims to handle Islam in the 21st century. My name is Mustafa and this is my co-host in the nick of time. If you wish to talk about Islam, the ideology, you have come to the right place. We cover current Islamic news, Islamic scripture, some crazy comments, and a weekly topic about Islam to examine, critique, and analyze. If this is not enough Islam for you, please drop by our Discord to discuss any further questions about Islam. We condemn any form of discrimination, violence, misogyny, slavery. However, we do embrace free speech and criticism if it's factual and correct. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy the Gin and Tonic Show.
Welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. My name is Mustafa, or just call me Moose, and I'm joined today by Drastic Measures. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, sir. How are you doing?
Well, we were just having this discussion, and I think, hi, Smile, how are you? So, yes, we were just having this discussion that Drastic, has officially, a UK resident, Drastic, has given me, a North American resident, a pass to use the word soccer for today's video.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously I prefer the word football, but I won't be starting an invasion of Canada if you use the word soccer. You'll get a certain amount of leeway from me.
All right. No, I thank you so much for the leeway. But yeah, it's today's topic. We really, Drastic and I were discussing this. We really wanted to do this for a while, but it's just like every day. I think Drastic was just telling me every day something new is happening. What's the latest Drastic that has happened?
Oh, I'm trying to say. Yeah, well, I mean, one of the ironies is with the World Cup going to Qatar, it was this whole situation of we need to bring the World Cup to different areas of the world that haven't had it before, and in itself, that's a reasonable statement to make. But Qatar have managed to go out. I think this is the earliest that the host nation has actually exited the competition. They've already been knocked out. That was, I think it was yesterday they were playing. So within 6 days, less than 1 week, they're already knocked out. And from what I understand, the Qatari fans were barely filling the stadium, and I think they all left before the game ended. So it seems that there's absolutely zero domestic interest in this competition. So therefore, the idea that you can bring it to other parts of the world so fans who've never seen it can appreciate it, well, it didn't seem like anybody really wanted to watch it actually from Qatar. So it's just another a nail in the coffin for all these spurious arguments that were given for Qatar to host. So yeah, that's one of the latest things anyway. There's some others, I'm sure I'll remember them as we go along, but yeah, it's just one disaster after another as far as I can see.
Yeah, and I think by the way, Nick really wanted to join us, and he wanted to do like the discussion about the workers, especially today, like how the workers are treated and the Kafala system, which is but he couldn't join us because ironically he was playing football, soccer, and got a concussion. The irony of the situation. So this game has been cursed. It's officially cursed in Islamic or Abrahamic terms. And I think there was the issue with the LGBTQ rights. There was the alcohol that was canceled last minute. And some liquor companies are also very mad at FIFA for canceling their contracts last minute. And
yeah, that's right. It was literally a few hours, I think, before the opening game started, or maybe within a couple of games. They suddenly did a U-turn after the last 12 years. They've been saying, oh no, the Islamic restrictions on drinking will not apply to this special dispensation. And then almost like 5 minutes before people are showing up at the stadium, it's like, no, we're doing a U-turn on that now. So tough luck. Again, it's just ridiculous on every level.
I think this might go to court in regards to breach of contract, that is. But I don't know how far they're gonna go because the what do you call it? The FIFA chief seems to be weirdly in denial. of a lot of the problems. And he went on this weird rant about like how he's a migrant, and it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I apologize for my language. What the fuck was this guy talking about?
Oh, that was yeah, wasn't that Platini? I think
Yeah,
at the press conference. Oh, yeah, he went into some really bizarre rant, and yeah, I can't even remember what question he was supposed to be asked, but yeah, I mean, to go back to the alcohol thing, I mean, I have to say, in terms of the list of aggrieved parties, the big corporate sponsors are the people that I least care about. But
yeah.
I have to say, if I was a Budweiser exec or whoever else has been sponsoring it, to turn around at the last minute and say, despite all these millions that you've put into sponsoring the organisation, you can't sell your product here, I'd be pissed off. I have to say. I mean, not that I really care about these corporations, but you could understand it from their position and why they would want to sue. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in that sense, I feel like this could be very disastrous. And I think this is, and it was weird because I was just doing some digging using the Canadian immigration website's national documentation package, and I just found loads and loads of. I just typed in Qatar. I just selected Qatar, and boy, oh boy, it opened this weird rabbit hole of what do you call it, articles, especially from the Human Rights Watch, as well as different websites like Voice of America, like Amnesty and all that stuff. So yeah, this one we wanted to talk about was again, we're just doing this as an introduction, as part of the discussion. We're not going to go through every single article. That's going to take fucking forever. So yeah, this is the Kafala system. For those who will watch and don't know what a kafala is, a kafala is basically a sponsorship system. It defines the relationship between foreign workers and their local sponsor, or kafil, which is usually their employer. And it has been used in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries such as Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, as well as Jordan and Lebanon. So again, these countries all are guilty of this, even though.
Moose. Sorry to interrupt you. Can I just say, because I know at the end of the last episode, you said you announced Nadir Ahmed was going to be on here today to talk about
Unfortunately, Nadir, he had some family issues that he had to address, so we had to reschedule again. Nadir didn't cancel because, like, he didn't want to come on. It was he couldn't come on. He explained it to us. We respect his wishes, and we'll reschedule as much as we can. He has been respectful, so
yeah, and he's confirmed it. He'll be free for 2 weeks' time, so that's the 10th of December, I think that is. So.
Yeah, and I hope also Nick gets better too. That way, and Culture Dinny agreed to be moderator for that discussion.
Okay.
So because we do need someone as neutral, and Culture Dinny can also play devil's advocate for everybody. So he's the most neutral we could find, and so he won't have to.
I know I certainly could not be neutral in that conversation. So.
Oh, absolutely. I would have the bias because of being friends with Nick. Yourself as well. We would have the bias of being inclined towards the non-believer, atheist, agnostic side. So we kind of need someone neutral, that is, to moderate the discussion.
Yeah, but as you say, just to highlight, it sounds like Nadir's actually got a genuine reason for not being here. So he wasn't ducking out. So we're not trying.
Oh no. We just had to receive it this morning. It was very last minute, and I got a call from Nick this morning. He's like, "Oh crap! I really hope things are okay with Nadir. I really hope things are okay." So I really look forward to him coming on to our show. And much respect to the man. We only attack the ideas, but not the person. Very respectful so far.
I'm well, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, again, we're gonna be nice. We're gonna be nice. Okay, be nice.
Sometimes I think it's okay to criticize a man as well, but that's a conversation for another time.
That's another conversation for another time. Yeah. I know. But yeah, like we were just saying, kafala is I actually learned of this when I was working with refugee law, that is, and this is what I came across, how worse this problem actually is of the kafala, because it's a sponsor, and this is common in all these countries that I just mentioned: Qatar, Bahrain, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. And the state basically gives individuals or companies sponsorship permits to employ foreign workers, with the exception of Bahrain. The sponsor covers travel expenses, provides housing, often dorm like accommodations. In case of domestic workers, the sponsor's home. And rather than hiring the individual directly, sponsors sometimes use private recruitment agencies. So, what do you call it? In most situations, what's weird is that it creates a weird power imbalance, because the workers are vulnerable to exploitation because they don't have a system of disputing any process or to join a union. Um, like the visa, the residency visa, as well as the employment visa, is linked to the kafil or the sponsor. So the sponsor can, at a whim, terminate them at a whim.
Now, Moose, can I ask a question? Because again, I know you're more familiar with the details of this side than I
Yeah,
am. You've done a bit of research, but as far as I know, it's something like, I don't know, 3/4 or 80% of the population in Qatar are foreign workers. I think the actual
yes,
the domestic population is tiny. I think it's probably the lowest of any country in the world. So, but you do seem to have two different classes of migrant workers. You tend to have kind of the rich,
mhm,
typically Western people who are involved in things like oil industry and various other kind of higher kind of status roles, and then you have those who are doing the more manual labor side.
yes,
And I don't know if they're all under this system or not, or is this just for the poorer, more exploited workers?
yeah.
I
I would
wasn't
say
sure.
it's more the poorer, exploited workers are mostly victims of this system. Even the richer workers, they could still get their residency terminated overnight. I would have to leave the country. Um, but
But
the
they don't
next,
tend to have this thing like where their passports are
yeah.
confiscated.
They don't get their passports taken away from them.
Yeah. Okay.
So they could, because the workers of a lower class could face like imprisonment. They could be deported, or even like they can't leave the workplace without the permission. There have been cases where in Saudi Arabia, workers, they just wanted to visit for, I think it was a Hajj or Umrah, and in Umrah they were arrested because they did not have their kafil or sponsor's permission to go to the city of Mecca.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this, but there's all sorts of horrible things I've read where it seems that for the poorer migrant workers who are doing that kind of manual labor side, that I think they have like, they're almost indebted. It is like a form of indentured servitude where they have
Yeah,
to pay off their well, essentially they're kind of paymasters or through this sponsorship system, part just through their wages. So they're kind of stuck there. I don't know. We'll get to those details later, but I know there's all sorts of exploitation that goes on. But
yeah,
um,
because apparently what's funny is that the origins is actually weirdly in Islamic jurisprudence. Interesting. This is very interesting. Islamic. I'd have to look into this Islamic jurisprudence origins of the legal guardianship of the kafala. That is so, because this makes it very interesting, and like why it's so pervasive in said countries, that it's part of the Islamic system. And even though it's a relatively modern concept, it might have origins in older traces. Like I think during the Caliphate of Omar, where you had non-Arabs cannot be masters of Arabs. So I think I feel like that's where the origins are probably from.
yeah,
Uh, but I'll definitely look into it because it became very popular in the 1950s, as I'm reading this article. Um, they would bring workers from abroad that didn't speak the language and were not aware of culture, that came without a social, support network. Uh, various initially the system mostly favored Arab workers, such as Egypt, but after the oil boom of the 70s, they turned to non-Arab workers, especially those from South Asia, due to desire for cheap labor. They always target South Asian people from Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India,
Yeah.
Sri Lanka, and they outnumbered Arab workers after the first Gulf War. So this was Gulf War was around the 1980s, I believe, late 1980, 88. Crap, I'm probably mixing up the dates. And it was weird because I was doing some Palestinian applications initially.
I think
Uh,
first Gulf War was 91. If
yeah,
memory
yeah,
serves.
91. And initially, most of the Arab workers in said Gulf countries were Egyptians, Palestinians, and Yemenis.
Mm.
So a lot of Palestinians were, initially exploited in this system. They tried to demand for their workers. Instead, they got expelled.
Mm.
Again, some people said it was because of their support, but in reality, Palestinians were not necessarily in support. It was just the PLO, like the liberating organization, which was headed by Yasser Arafat, who favored Saddam Hussein during that time. But most Palestinians weren't in favor of that. But despite that, despite that they them having no support or no evidence for their support, they were still expelled or deported from these countries. So if Israel isn't necessarily the only country to blame, but especially these Gulf countries are also to blame for Palestinians. Plus, Palestinian workers were, also starting to demand for their rights, and then they were like, "Fuck you, slaves." So they
Well,
turned
it, it
turned to
is kind of it's kind of ironic, I think, because I mean, not really that surprising, but the level of concern for exploited Palestinians at the hand of the Israelis, which, to be fair, is a legitimate concern.
oh yes,
Um, the when it's other Muslim majority nations that are exploiting those same workers as cheap labor and having terrible rights, etc., it doesn't seem that there's much of a voice. I mean, there may have been in the Middle East, but I certainly don't remember any great kind of concern for the Palestinians when they're being exploited in
yeah.
Qatar or Saudi Arabia. So
Yeah,
bit of
the only incident I remember was the Black Saturday in Jordan. That was the only incident I remember. But then again, like I'd have to look into it. So there's not a lot that was covered. But given the stories of different, and again, I've done different applications. Given the story of different refugees and their families, uh, they were booted out of the countries and never given citizenship, or not even provided, um, what do you call it, the services that are available, the social services available to Qatari or Kuwaiti or Gulf residents or citizens. They were not
Mm.
afforded the same privileges. They had to pay extra for said privileges.
Which is kind of ironic because this is one of many concerns that, or one of many complaints that are sort of done for Palestinians within Israel and within the Palestinian territories, is this lack of full citizenship and able to kind of take advantage of all the same kind of opportunities and everything. And yet here you have the same kind of thing going on. I mean, I obviously there's some differences, but there's still a level of exploitation and not being a full citizen. And certainly in the wider world, there seemed to be little kind of Muslim protest about this. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, I find that interesting too. And you remember when you asked about which workers it applies to? So here, it says here in this article that the system applies to almost all foreign workers working in a kafala host country, comprising of all nationalities, economic classes, and professions. So it does apply to a lot. I've even seen some businessmen who've, they've just been working for generations, never given the citizenship, but they have to take permission from the kafil.
And as I say, I think I'm sure that I've read of a couple of cases over the years where the wealthier workers, they've transgress some kind of law, and they have been kicked out of the country. So it's
Mhm.
not like it never affects them, but it's
Oh yes.
in a practical sense, it's the poorer workers from the Indian subcontinent that bear the brunt of this kind of
Yeah.
unfair system.
Because a lot of these workers come from the African continent and South Asia, and they often take jobs that nationals find undesirable for financial or cultural reasons, such as construction, domestic work, or the service industries. Minimum wage, yeah, so it's only $350 monthly in Jordan, and at least 367 for nationals. So there's a $17 difference overall per month. According to data from the United, I don't know how this is from 2020. Oh wow, there were 36 million international migrants across the GCC countries, Jordan and Lebanon in 2020. Nearly half the combined total population of this country. So half the population is basically of these migrant workers. Half the population.
Does that? I was wondering if that might include that, because I know that places like Jordan do have a huge number of refugees that are. So I'm not
Yes.
sure if they are
Yeah,
counted in these figures or not. But
yeah, because Jordan hosts a lot of refugees from, I think, Syria,
Syria
Palestine,
and
and
Lebanon does as well, I think, doesn't it?
Lebanon
Lebanon has
too.
a lot
Yeah.
of yeah.
So I'm not sure if they're counting those populations. You are correct. Um, so yeah, that's something, because this is what we could find, and we're trying to dig in as much as we can. But also critics have called it modern slavery. I think Nick mentioned it in a previous video, because there is a power imbalance, and it's mostly like we said, they keep your passport. They sometimes, they're like, even the so-called, there were legislation introduced, but they were never like implemented.
Well, Smile says in the chat, Islam abolished slavery, but nobody seems to have told Qatar. I mean, yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, okay, it's not literal chattel slavery, but it would certainly, calling it indentured servitude would not be
Yeah,
hyperbolic. I think that is really accurate when you look at all the elements in terms of vir- virtually in prison there, having to pay off essentially a debt before you've even started. I think it's a reasonable comparison to at least say indentured servitude
oh
for these.
absolutely, absolutely. Also, let me just click, if you guys want to actually look into this article, I'll also send it to the chat. Also, if anybody wants to come on and discuss this, you're also welcome. Let me just present the what do you call it, the link as well. So if you're welcome to come on as well to the StreamYard to discuss how, if you have any other information, that is. Yeah, so apparently abuses include restricted movement and communication. Employers regularly, confiscate passports, visas, and phones. Interesting. And confine domestic workers to their homes.
So I
Non,
mean, that is really very close to slavery, isn't it? Where you
yeah,
can dictate not even that they can't leave the country, but they can't even leave the household. I mean,
yeah.
that is very close to slavery.
Yeah, and non-domestic workers often live in overcrowded dorms. This I have seen, the ugly side, which puts them at the greater risk of contracting illnesses such as COVID-19. Again, even during the pandemic, this was a very, like the start, this was a big concern, but I'm surprised nothing was done about this. And the healthcare is lacking. You said something about debt bondage, because
That's
almost most countries require employers to pay recruitment fees. These often get passed on to workers who take out loans to pay them or become indebted to the recruiter. Employers sometimes reduce or withhold workers' wages ostensibly to pay off recruiters, but sometimes as punishment.
yeah.
So there's this. Experts say the forced labor, there's deception and coercion by recruiters when enlisting workers can amount to forced labor. Contract substitution is a common in which workers unwittingly accept poor wages and working conditions by signing multiple contracts, in some in languages they don't understand.
But also, Moose, if you think about that, some workers are taking out loans in terms
Yeah.
of trying to deal with the debt bondage. Well, you could easily see for some workers that once you tack on the interest to those loans, well, assuming that you are able to do interest-based loans in Qatar, but I'm assuming these are going to be from nefarious sources, so I doubt they'll be sticking to the Islamic rule on interest. But it suggests to me that you could find yourself in perpetual debt by taking out one of these loans. I don't know if that's the case or not,
Oh,
but
definitely. I think
just as we know from any Western country, you know that people can take out like $100 or £100 loan, and they end up with debts that runs into thousands within a couple of
yes,
years because of
yes.
not having the financial resource to pay it off, etc. So you could imagine that some people could get trapped in that kind of cycle for years. I would have thought.
Yeah, and this is common in even though in Western countries, I've even worked for I admit I've worked for um, installment loan companies as well as payday loans.
Boo, boo.
Yeah, quiet. I was a student. I didn't know. But yeah, it was once I discovered it, and weirdly enough, I started pointing out the problems within the company. They found they did not. They laid me off again. They didn't fire me. They laid me off.
Hmm. Well,
So
yeah, and I mean, in Britain, I mean, I've seen the other sides of that. I've worked with people who've got into debt with these payday loan kind of
yeah,
schemes, and they even had to shut a number of companies down. I remember a few years ago because
yeah,
the interest rates were so extravagantly ridiculous that there was no chance you were ever going to pay it off. And and we're talking in Western countries where there's going to be some kind of regulation. Can you imagine the kind of horrible um, terms and conditions you might get for a loan in Qatar, where you've got no real rights or no way to enforce them? I can't imagine it being
absolutely.
any better.
Absolutely. And not only they're from Qatar, even from their host countries or individuals themselves,
Mm.
like those
Loan
individual
sharks and
lenders, loan sharks.
yeah.
So this could be put a very dangerous situation for the workers. And there's even visa trading. Sponsors sometimes illegally sell a worker's visa to another employer while remaining the official sponsor. Yikes. The new employer might not even keep the same terms as the original one, requiring different types of work or providing lower wages. And of course, irregular residency status. Workers depend on the sponsors to remain in the country legally because sponsors can invalidate their status for any reason. This is kind of terrifying because, this, and of course, like they can just on a whim just get rid of you. And you're just like you're not only trapped, but you can also be let go, and you're just on your own.
Well, again, as you said, I mean, it said in the article, many obviously people are coming from the South Asian continent, so they're not necessarily going to. Most, I imagine, will not speak Arabic. So, as it says, they're going to be in a language they don't understand. You have no idea what terms you could be signing yourself up for. Um, so the potential for abuse just seems limitless in that kind of situation.
Oh, and that potential goes to racism too. So apparently, the racism of darker-skinned African and South Asian workers, again in the 2020 UN report in Qatar on racism, found that foreign workers of all income levels reported their salaries depended on their countries of origin, and that despite possessing professional degrees, some migrant workers reported being relegated to low-income jobs, most commonly linked to and occupied by workers of their racial or ethnic group.
So, what would we put that down to? There, I mean, just um, speculating on this issue. Is this a representation maybe of the people who are hiring? They've got certain preconceived ideas about, well,
Yes.
if you're kind of a European or a North American, we'll accept kind of you're going to be of a higher status, whereas even if you've got the full qualifications because you're from Indian or African background, sub-Saharan African background, then we'll just assume that you are kind of lower status, lower class, or
Yes.
lack of.
Oh, this is actually a case. This is actually definitely the case because there was a time where I've, and this is also based on word of mouth, South Asian as well as Southeast Asian servants are seen as more, I would say, submissive. Hence why they're hired for the lower jobs or the domestic workers or like lower workers, because of they're seen as submissive. That is, there was a time where Pakistani workers, some like chose to rebel in, I think it was either Abu Dhabi or something. I can't remember. And again, these are horror stories I've heard. They stopped hiring Pakistanis because they had this preconceived notions that Pakistanis are more rebellious. So they started hiring South Indian workers, seeing them as more submissive. Because again, I think it was also because Pakistanis were like, we're Muslim too, what the heck? So, that's why I think one of the Pakistani workers beat up the sponsor or something like that. So,
see, that's kind of funny because I might have assumed that a fellow Muslim, they would think more highly of them than say somebody from a Hindu or a Sikh background who might have come from India. And I would have thought the kind of in-group preference for Muslims might have played to Pakistani workers' advantage, but it sounds like it's gone the opposite kind of way.
yeah. And despite them being of Muslim, they use that against them. And also, gender-based is pretty rampant. Like we have domestic workers who are usually women face the most abuse, including sexual violence. The victims choose not to report and are afraid to upset their sponsors, even charged with a crime themselves. Such as countries like Kuwait and Qatar have imprisoned female workers for extramarital sex, even in cases of rape, because just the idea of, I was reading this law, just the idea of a man knowing the man is enough to go it against the rape victims, against her, or in many cases male too. It will go against the rape victim, and the rape victim will just face the charge of extramarital sex, and they could get imprisoned for that.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I shudder to think the numbers of women who might have gone through these kind of situations. I mean, it almost seems to be a kind of form of sex trafficking, or at least that's how it turns out once you're into the country. Well, actually, I mean, that is how sex trafficking works in many other places in the world, isn't it? Women are convinced, they're persuaded that there's a job available for them in the country, and then they end up in these horrible, sexually abusive situations which they can't get out of. It's horrible.
Many of these workers, like the workers accept the jobs only because they offer a higher pay. They're kind of stuck because it's for the promise of higher pay compared to what they're offered in their home country as well. And that's the sad situation that they're faced. And sure, the proponents say facilitating easy legal entry makes them less vulnerable to human smuggling. I would dispute that. They need more.
To me, that seems like, in all practical sense, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's almost similar to human smuggling, just done legally. Because it's okay. So the highest remittances, which is to their host country, goes from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar. Yeah, of course, these four are the. Then you have Oman, Bahrain, Lebanon, Jordan, and Lebanon. And highest receivers are India, Egypt, Pakistan, Philippines, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Yemen, Jordan, all others. Now, even from people from Jordan are technically the Palestinian workers who are residents of Jordan, but they're also second-class citizens of Jordan too. So they're not necessarily Jordanian citizens or Jordanians themselves. So,
well, I think there's a couple of million Palestinians living in Jordan, isn't there?
Yeah. Because again, they migrated from the West Bank to the East Bank. So, that's where the population comes from. So, so there's to any parts of the world abuse such as withholding passports, like and practices such as binary to one, but even do not rival for the yeah. So they many of even the worst programs don't you know have this. Yeah, of course, the 2022 FIFA World Cup has thrown a spotlight. It's a blessing in disguise, weirdly enough. But I've seen Qatar trying to sport wash. I think we were talking about this. They were trying to sport wash or whitewash this by saying, "Oh, the workers are offered free tickets and blah
Yeah.
blah blah." And they've denied the number of workers that have died in countries that.
Well, yeah, I think it was the Guardian newspaper. I think it was last year. They'd contacted all the main embassies of the countries which have the most migrant workers going there, so India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, those kind of places, and they said I think it was a combined something like 6,500 migrant workers had died over the period of working on the stadiums of the World Cup, and the Qatari government have come back and said, "Oh well, they weren't all working on the stadiums," and they've come up with some ridiculously low figure, like only 3 people have died working on the stadiums, which I don't believe for a second. But even if the number is lower, the very fact that they're not challenging the fact that 6,500 migrant workers have died in relation to their occupations, whether that be working on a World Cup stadium or some other horrible situation where there isn't proper safety precautions and everything else, it's still pretty shocking. Six and a
Yeah,
half thousand people. If that was pretty much anywhere else in the world, it would be horrifying. And yet, they'll argue on a semantic point. Well, no, they weren't all working on the stadiums. Some of them were beaten to death by their employers, or something.
yeah. It was outside the stadium.
So what are you complaining about?
Yeah, it's so weird. Like they've tried to. I don't know if it's called shift the goalpost, but it's definitely a lot of whataboutery have also been used. Like, oh, Europe also does this, or America does this, and blah blah blah. It's like it's a method of deflecting from the issue, where they're getting accused of it, but then it's like, yes, we know those issues exist. We're not in denial of those issues, but let's talk about this issue for the topic. That is like, let's talk about the issue at hand. So there will be a lot of whataboutery or trying to deflect the issue. Oh,
Yeah.
I think Nick also had a video for us to review.
Okay.
I think it
If
was.
anyone wants to come on to help us with the review video, please
Oh
do.
yes,
It's always fun to have multiple people. So what's this one?
This one's called "Cause of Death: Migrant Workers in the 2022 World Cup." Voice
very
of
appropriate. It's just what we're talking about.
Yeah, and VOA, of course, we're gonna have to acknowledge this based on Wikipedia. VOA is funded in whole or part by the American government. So we are aligning with the Dajjal, evil America. So let me know if there's any volume issues or anything like that. So if you have a point, I can pause the video as well. Also, whoever wants to join the chat, I'm sending this link again. You want to respond, you have something to contribute, please, you're welcome to do so. But anyway, let's begin. Whoops.
मलाई लाग्छ फुटबल यो संसारकै सबभन्दा लोकप्रिय खेल यो खेल्दा मलाई एकदम खुसी महसुस हुन्छ यहाँ चाहिँ सब लोकल टिमहरु हुन्छ everyone is celebrating सेलिब्रेसन गर्न त्यो ट्रफीहरुलाई फोटोहरु खिचाउने हो अनि आएपछि क्याश प्राइज हुन्छ अलिअलि त्यसको केही फाइनसाइटी गर्ने हो सबै दाहरु मिलेर
Certainly the most surprising decision was the 2022 victory by Qatar to become both the first Middle East nation and the smallest nation to host the FIFA World Cup.
An estimated 2 million migrant workers are in Qatar, mostly from South Asia and Africa. There were widespread complaints of unpaid wages, dire living conditions, and dangerous construction sites.
All the stadiums
They are state of the art. They are beautiful.
Oh, this guy.
No way can FIFA accept to be responsible for the welfare of workers. They belong to commercial and industrial companies of other countries. They couldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the faces, Sepp Blatter, and yeah, the new guy. So I thought it was Platini who did that bizarre rant, but I think it was that Infantino, whatever his name is, the new FIFA guy. I mean, all of them just they've all got corruption all over them, and so their statements about there should be no concern about the workers. I don't think a single person believed them from the start, and yet they were allowed to get away with it because the corruption was so deep in FIFA. They knew that it just didn't matter. They were going to get away with it. It was for money making reasons, and nobody gave two shits about what it was going to do to the migrant workers and who died making it. It was just all about the money.
Absolutely, and it was so shocking that I was actually shocked when he said something like, oh, we shouldn't be concerned about them. I was very shocked when it's like, what? Like they're basically deflecting any responsibility from themselves, even though you were paid the money in the bid. There's a bidding process, and Qatar bid it the highest and practically bribed you to host this World Cup.
Yeah, well, it's ridiculous. I mean, Qatar's got a long history of this kind of horrible exploitation and slave-like conditions, and yet they're going to say, "Well, there's no reason to be concerned." That would be like them awarding the World Cup to Ukraine for this year and saying, "Oh no, there's no need to worry about being hit by a Russian bomb. There's no need to worry about that." It's like, it's going on right now. Of course, you should be worried about it. I mean, it's just such a lie.
Yeah, another good
It's like they're
comparison.
gaslighting. I feel like they're gaslighting or something.
Yeah. Another in a situation, it would be similar situation. Someone shared this. It was a parody where they were considering like FIFA should award it to North Korea.
You know what? I mean, it would probably have less ethical problems at this stage. And sorry, I mean, spin on a second, but I just want to point out, it said right at the start of the video, it's the first time a Middle Eastern country has been awarded the World Cup, and it's certainly true. But almost every other candidate would have been better. Now, I think when they say Middle Eastern, they were more concerned. I seem to remember Sepp Blatter saying things like it's important that the Muslim world gets a World Cup. Now, Tunisia has been making World Cup bids since, I think, the late 1990s. Every single time the World Cup comes up, Tunisia has made a bid. Now, they would have been, if you want a Muslim majority country, Tunisia would have been a far better option. Turkey would have been a much better, Turkey's it's got a proper tradition of football. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more easily able to accommodate a World Cup. It's a very big country. It's got all sorts of good quality football stadiums, infrastructure, and also a climate that is not insane in the summer. I mean, I know it's still very hot in Turkey, but it would have been workable. So this idea that it had to be in a Muslim majority country, I mean, they say Middle Eastern, but that's essentially what they mean. They had much better options. So this was just an excuse to go to the place where they could get the most bribes, essentially, and the most financial kickbacks.
Absolutely. And Qatar being, one of the Gulf countries, I'm guessing their main trade is oil, I'm guessing. Is it oil?
Could be. I have heard that rumor. Yeah.
All right. Let's see what they actually published here.
मेरो अङ्कलको डेथ चाहिँ लगभग 3.5 महिना
Oh
पहिले
damn! It's the nephew. It's the nephew of the worker.
Right.
They did a story on him too, like another article I was reading. So it's this boy. All right.
We find coffins with dead bodies arriving to Kashmir airport.
Oh, Moose.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to pause. Somebody's asked in the chat who were the other candidates for hosting the World Cup. From what I remember, Tunisia was one of them, as they usually are. I think Australia was one. I think the United States also, although they've got the next World Cup.
They've the
And-
United States, Canada, and Mexico got the.
That's right. Yeah, they've got a joint bid. But I know I'm certain Tunisia did. Australia did also, and I think there was one other candidate whose the name of the country escapes me now. But like I said, I mean, any country almost would have been better than Qatar. But if you did want it to be a Muslim majority country, there was still much better options than Qatar. So
like you mentioned, Tunisia and Turkey, much better.
Both much better candidates.
Much better options than Qatar. And I remember them doing the what do you call it, opening ceremony with Morgan Freeman and like this kid who is disabled, and they go on this weird lecture on like we should accept our differences and blah blah blah. I was really reading the irony in that, and it's like it made me cringe. It was really making me cringe. And
I mean, sorry, just to cut in. Another advantage of places like Turkey or Tunisia, they're a lot less harsh in terms of Islamic law and the problems that's caused with the issues around women's rights and alcohol and
LGBTQ plus, right?
the gay community, etc. Not to say that they are not issues in these other countries, but the laws are far more liberal in those places, and I think you would have had much less problems with all of these things than it just keep recurring in Qatar.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To do the buys, you're right. It's because Turkey and Tunisia, they don't have this endless pool of money to be able to provide kickbacks for all the greasy FIFA executives.
That description, greasy FIFA executive.
Oh, they are. I mean, look at the state of them. I mean, actually, I was going to use a description that's a bit unflattering, so I'll resist that. But
I mean, use that. We're a free speech platform. You could use that.
Well, it's a bit extreme, so I'll hold my tongue on it. But let's face it. They to me they look rather sinister and just corruption written all over them. To be honest.
It was that statement. But yeah, let's continue with this.
Next महिना यसको टिकट ओके थियो मान्छेमा जान्छु दिनमा बात गरेको रातिमा विचार मेरो नाम रमेश गुप्ता अब तिन दिन श्री महावीर स्पोर्ट्स क्लब
The Moose, where is this guy from?
I feel like this is Nepal.
This is Nepal, is it right?
Yes.
Okay.
सानो व्यापार गर्थे जस्तै आफ्नो पसललाई अलि एक्सपेन्ड गर्थे जनता जति मान्छे यहाँ सरकारले अनि हामीलाई
Is there a bit of an echo on this?
Yeah, my apologies. Is this okay now?
Well, I mean, you need to play the video to see whether I meant from the video. It still sounds like an echo to me. I was just I don't know if the audience can hear an echo or not. If they can't, that's fine. I was just thinking for the audience, but I mean, if you can't get rid of it, it's fine. Just carry on.
And yes, Culture Jenny, you can recommend an old video you made and do the bites. Or at least you can have a beer in Tunisia. They got a beer drinking culture, haven't they?
Well, it's the same in Turkey. I mean, in Turkey, you can get alcohol without a problem. So, yeah.
Like, personally, for me, alcohol is the least of the concerns. It's more the human rights abuses for myself.
I agree. I agree.
And
There's certainly a hierarchy of importance, but it's it just
yeah,
shows how many issues have been created for no other reason than FIFA wanted to make more money.
yeah.
But
कुन काम पाउने हो त्यो त फिक्स छैन
Is
तर
there still the echo?
no, it's gone now. It's gone.
Okay, good.
मलाई मेरो त्यो काम गर्ने क्षमता अनुसार मलाई त्यो लाइक अफिस बोयमा राम्रो हुन्थ्यो या क्यासियर रेसियरमा गर्न चाहन्छु लाग्छ अब विदेशतिर त्यस्तो काम नै हुन्छ बिल्डिङ सिल्डिङ कन्स्ट्रक्सनहरूमा अब के हुन्छ थाहै हुँदैन डर त लाग्छ अब जे विदेशमा मन चाहे काम मिल्दैन अब जे काम पाउँछ त्यही नै गर्छ मान्छे अब पढिरहेको थिएन अनि जे काम दिन्छ त्यही नै गर्नुपर्छ त्यस्तै थियो कतारमा त धेरैजना मर्छन्
In 2010, when Qatar clinched its bid to host the 2022 FIFA World Cup, the controversies began. The tiny Gulf country didn't have the infrastructure in place to host the World Cup. Qatari representatives were accused of bribing their way to securing the cup. Investigations into alleged corruption continue more than a decade later. There were complaints summer heat, sometimes soaring to 50 degrees, was too much for fans and players. That was solved by moving the games to the winter. And while wealthy, Qatar has virtually no native construction workers. But over the next 10 years, the population of foreign workers grew, adding more than 65% to the foreign population.
Oh, jeez.
The influx meant the already fraught system of hiring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of it. I mean, I didn't realize how much it increased. Yeah, because I think before it started, it was over half the population were migrant workers, but it's risen to something like 75 to 80% now, and maybe even more looking at that graph, because that was a huge increase. But I also just wanted to quickly point out again. I know this is a more superficial issue than the workers' rights, but this idea that it was solved, the blistering heat, by moving the World Cup to winter. Well, when they made the bid, Qatar specifically said there's no problem with holding a World Cup in the summer, and all bids for the World Cup are reliant on being able to hold it in the summer. So when they rewarded it, it was on condition that it was going to be held in the summer. Now, as soon as they admitted that they'd essentially lied and they had no intention of holding it in the summer, it should have been stripped from them right then, and it should have been given to one of the other candidates. But what happened? FIFA just allowed them to change it, to basically trash nearly 90 years of World Cup history, to move it to a different season when they knew that that was part of the bid, and they all the other candidates legitimately should have, I don't know, sued FIFA or something for it. Yet they got away with it. They lied, and they've moved it to the winter, and it's just one more element of corruption that shows up in this whole kind of saga.
I think you also mentioned something like they promised the cooling systems within the stadium, or something like that.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to find. I remember seeing some articles at the time when the Qatari World Cup bid. They were saying things like, "Oh, we're going to create artificial clouds to hang over the stadiums to block out the sun and reduce the heat, or even create artificial rain so that it will cool down the players." I mean, this is the stuff of science fiction, and yet that was accepted as a serious way of being able to hold it in the summer. Now, obviously, anyone with a brain in their head knew that was crap. But again, FIFA just thought, no, that's fine. Yeah, you're going to create artificial clouds, and what else? I mean, we'll I don't know. We'll have a time machine as well. We'll invent, and we'll use that. I mean, this is just science fiction crap that they were coming up with, and yet it was just accepted as a legitimate response. And so again, it just shows the ridiculous corruption that was going on.
If anything, it's more damning for the FIFA as an organization. Like, what the fuck are you?
Oh, doing? It is. I mean, as much as Qatar deserves all the criticism in the world for these horrible human rights abuses, FIFA are not just complicit. They actively encouraged it. They wanted this from the start. I mean, pretty much even before the World Cup bid came along, there were rumors going around that it was a foregone conclusion, because everybody knows how corrupt FIFA has been for such a long time. So yeah, it's appalling. Oh, sorry. Can I just say this is all in my opinion. I don't have absolute proof that FIFA are corrupt. This is just in my opinion, in case anyone's watching that wants to sue me. Because I don't think any of the investigations conclusively proved corruption. So I just want to put that caveat in. But yeah, in my opinion, they're corrupt as hell.
And welcome, cultured Ginny, the Broad Humanities channel.
Yeah,
Jenny.
thank you.
So we have.
I was
we have
kind of chilling myself, but that wasn't important. What I wanted to comment on was about artificial clouding. That actually does exist and is possible.
Really?
Yes, it is.
So why are they not employing it?
The Russians did it, so I know it's possible. They did it during the Soviet times. So the technology is there, but I don't.
Yeah. But how not to hover over a stadium for at will for a World Cup match anytime you need it? I don't think the technology is there for that.
Maybe not exactly that, but I know that you can create, dark clouds. That is possible.
But this is not. They were basically saying we can create clouds to hang over a stadium for the required time to reduce the temperature. That's bullshit.
Yeah,
I mean, they could add a lot of particles in the air. That would be possible.
But that's a different thing to what they actually said they were going to do. They were saying they were going to create clouds, thick, fluffy clouds to block out the sun and cool the stadium down.
Which is very interesting because if that's the case, like they make a claim, but the technology, like Ginny said, is in Russia, and
I only know that they did a similar thing during the Soviet times in Russia, so I think that it's possible.
It's possible.
I wouldn't say,
but not in the way that they were saying that they could do it, and they came out later and admitted that it was unfeasible. So.
All right.
Yeah, that is a definitely that should have been a big red flag on FIFA's part, and how they ignored that and brushed it under the rug is
well, they just turned around and said, yeah, okay, hold it in the winter then. Even though that invalidates your bid, just hold it in the winter. If I was the Australians or the Americans or the Tunisians or anyone else who bid for that World Cup, I would have sued them, quite frankly.
Yeah. Because keep in mind, these the what do you call it? The summer season is also open season where the players are not committed to other contracts, especially to their league contracts as well. So,
it's just available. It has essentially disrupted all of world football to move the football all across the world has now had to accommodate this World Cup. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's quite ridiculous. Let's see what reports are.
Going abroad for labor would be put to the test, and it was. Construction boomed. A $300 million renovation of its Khalifa International Stadium, 7 new stadiums, and a new luxury city, Lusail, where the Lusail iconic stadium will host the World Cup final. Qatar now boasts more than 100 new hotels and serviced residences, new skyscrapers, entertainment plazas, museums, public artworks, and a complete new metro and tram system. As quickly as all those buildings rose, so too did reports of human rights abuses of the people who were building them. Human rights groups, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, as well as news media, reported that workers were subjected to wage theft and restrictions on their movement. Most egregiously, they said, workers suffered from dangerous working and living conditions. Thousands of workers died during Qatar 2022 World Cup-related construction, far more than in the run-up to every other World Cup or Olympic Games in the past 30 years combined.
And Moose, pause it just for 1 second. I think it's worth giving this a bit of context as well when you're talking about the infrastructure side. There were a lot of red flags when South Africa held the World Cup in 2010 itself, because just like this, there were a lot of new infrastructure projects, and yet they were essentially white elephants, where it was stuff that the ordinary population did not have the wealth to be able to use. And many of the stadiums have been mostly empty or fallen into disuse since the end of the World Cup. And a lot of these infrastructure projects, they were sold as, oh, this is going to long term benefit the ordinary people of the country. And it's not been the case in South Africa. It created a huge legacy of debt for the country, and it's not had any of the benefits that they've really talked about. At least from the, I mean, I've not looked at it in a few years, but and these were the complaints, and it was essentially saddling I mean, South Africa is obviously rich by African standards, but it's still at best a middle income country that couldn't really afford to have this legacy of debt saddled on them just for the. And again, it was an example of how FIFA was essentially exploiting a poorer country to make a quick buck. Now, it's slightly different in Qatar's case, obviously, because it's a richer country. But again, how many of the poor people are going to benefit from all these super rich, the poor migrants? Are they going to be able to use these nice posh hotels and these, new shopping centres? It's again, it's a kind of legacy of corruption where it's just a few rich people are going to benefit from it.
Long live capitalism. Yay.
Yeah, this is also the dark. We're also seeing the ugly side of capitalism as well in this too. So yeah, it's quite devastating.
I'm not proposing communism, by the way, but you know.
Oh no, not me neither. Me neither. We're not pro-communist.
Just to clarify.
Let's clarify.
I'm just saying that a lot of issues that exist, that are connected, or discussed here as religious issues, are in fact issues of monetary and material things.
Well, and there was a similar thing with Brazil holding the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics. It was a way for the FIFA and at least for the World Cup and the IOC for the Olympics to make a financial killing at the expense of essentially poor Brazilians. I mean, they were clearing out like the poor neighborhoods in Brazil to try and kind of clean things up, and so people wouldn't see a lot of poverty going on. It's like, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to pretend that Brazil's got no social problems. Let's get rid of all these scummy poor people, so all the tourists and all the rich executives and everything can enjoy their World Cup. And there was from what I remember, there was like a lot of police violence and stuff, clearing out these kind of slums and things. So again, these are all the sorts of things that FIFA benefit from when they do they under the guise of bringing a World Cup to the world. There's a lot of casualties that go along with that economically, and in the case of Qatar, actual people's lives. So anyway, I'm sorry, I've done me ranting, my social justice ranting. So I'll
no, that's okay. That's okay. Was it the FIFA or was it the Olympic Games that were held in Berlin just prior to the Second World War?
It was the Olympic Games.
Olympic
Games.
Yeah,
it was the Olympic Games. Was it 1936? Yeah,
1936 or 38, somewhere.
So the Nazis have been in power for 3 years by then, and also, but the FIFA World Cup was held in fascist Italy in. Was it 34 or 38? It was one of those two World Cups. I think it was 1938. It was held in Italy.
Fascist Italy, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a history of these big sporting events really compromising on the morals. So I suppose in that sense, we shouldn't be that shocked with Qatar. But I suppose in this current world of technology where everyone's got access to the information, you can sort of. You can understand in the 30s, a lot of people didn't know really what was going on or have access to that kind of information. But nowadays, they do it. And it's
now
just
there's no excuse, Now there's just no excuse. And you pointed out the deaths. A 2021 Guardian newspaper, you were correct. Investigation revealed more than 6,500 deaths of migrant workers in Qatar since the country was awarded the World Cup and this is from 2021.
I mean, this is enormous.
Yeah, and as I say, I mean, I think in that same article you'll find the the Qatari government will make a claim like, oh no, only 3 people died in relation to actually working on the World Cup stadiums out of those 6,500. I mean, I can believe that for a second, but even assuming it's a lower number, you shouldn't have anybody dying to build a World Cup stadium. I mean, when Germany hosted the World Cup in 2006, did anyone die? No. When England hosted it in 1966, did anyone die? No. So it's these things are avoidable.
And
also remember, this is a country with less than 3 million inhabitants.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking citizens, I'm talking total population.
Yeah, including all the migrants, yeah.
And
so so more than 6,000 deaths is,
huge.
It's huge.
Well, yeah, I mean that would be the equivalent. I mean, England and Wales have got what, nearly 60 million, so per capita that would be the equivalent of what, 20 times that. So it'd be, what's that, 65,000? So 100. That'd be like 130,000 people dying for England to host the World Cup. I mean, nobody would accept that as a
I mean, there exist wars with less death tolls than that.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm just flabbergasted that they have managed to, cause this much death just trying to host this.
Yeah. No, it's insane. But
I'm also beginning to almost be a little bit suspicious, because I know that there is, a lot of incompetence that can cause death, but this number feels so extreme when you consider it in the context of Qatar, that even I am beginning to be a little bit doubtful. But if it is true, it is enormous.
They're talking about the entire migrant population. So obviously, well, supposedly, so there's going to be people that are not are going to be working in other situations. But even if it's half that, or even if it's just 1,000, I mean, just 1,000 is still ridiculously high.
Yes.
There should be 0 deaths. And as I said before, the fact that Qatar shrugs off those 6,500 deaths by saying, well, they weren't all at the World Cup stadiums, as if that somehow justifies it anyway. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, and that, like, they've come up with excuses. Oh, they got ill, or they got I'm like, that's a lot of illnesses over those number of years.
I mean, these are numbers of deaths that are comparable to war zones.
Yeah, they really are. They really are.
So this is quite an alarming situation, and this was like reported.
Amnesty International says most death certificates list natural causes or cardiac arrest as the cause of death.
Yes, this is what I was saying. Yeah, other diseases, stomach, they list something else.
Causes that shift the blame and liability away from employers.
उहाँ बस्नुहुन्थ्यो कतारमै, अनि त्यहाँ भएको साथीहरू, गाउँको मान्छेहरू त्यहाँ कतारमा छन् धेरै, जो टोलको गाउँको सबले सहयोग गरेको थियो त्यहाँ बस्ने सब साथीहरूले। अनि करिब 3 लाख जति खर्च भएको थियो उहाँको बडी ल्याउनलाई, सबले सहयोग गरेर
हम नाम मिला दिसा घर वाला मृत्यु को भगले कतार में 3-4 महीना भगले। और बेटा 15-16 वर्ष के है, और बुआ 10 वर्ष के है, एगो 8 वर्ष के है, एगो 5.5 साल के। कोई 7 बजे है, कोई 6 बजे है, कोई 5 में उठ गए। उठली, अंगना घर बाहर ली, दुकान से बाहर ली, दुकान खोल ली, फिर बस सबको बिठा ली, तो चाय नाश्ता बने ली, चाय नाश्ता को के सब तब खाना बोली, तब खाना बने बन में, तो खाना पीना बना के माने कोनो काम तो इधर कर लेने, तो दुकान में बेच ली, बुआ के इधर चले गए बाजार उजार, तो दुकान में बेच ली। दुकान के आमदनी तो नहीं है, जे माने बिक्री बैठाल तो एक फिर सामान है, अभी नहीं हुई है दुकान एमे लास्ट कनी पूंजी लगे लिए, तो खोलबे के लिए 3-4 महीना भेले पूंजी लागला, तो वही के फिर बिक्री आल, ओके फिर सामान अनहो होने अभी नहीं घर में लगे, वह सामान पहले छले इनका ना, तो ओकरे पैसा किन के से 1.5 टावर सब चले। नया काम नहीं कर रहा चाचा, नया काम नहीं कर रहा। अथी भोर में सुबह में जाइ छलियै 9 बजे तो 7 बजे 6 बजे फिर 4 बजे ना चलि अबै छलियै ड्यूटी में से जेठकी जान के बेटा नहीं रहा वही जा अंकल लगते माने चच्चे वही जा तो वह मालूम देला किछु भेले देह में दुख हमरा से कथु नहीं कहला हमरा बालो बुझे कते नहीं बतिये उतिये छले सब कोइयो किछु नहीं कहल के सामने एके दे खाली कल सब पार्टी नहीं हुआ है कतार से में तो पार्टी कल कर खाली दर्द एतबे कर किछु नहीं अभी के दर्द के लिए के 4 दिन में से हमरा बाजे के मन नहीं करे बातें करे के मन नहीं करे आने खाए इच्छा नहीं करे खाए अब आदमी खत्म हो तो कुछ माने दिमाग के नहीं काम गल कते से जाए उसने तो माने सबके तो रोए लगल छोड़ो खत्म हो जिंदा रहे तब न कोनो बात तब कथी सोचे कोनो दिमाग के नहीं काम शहर में जखन माने जखन मन पड़े है तो इतना अपने अपने कनाइत रहे जितना मन पड़े थे अपने कनाइत
But what we see every day, we find coffins with dead bodies arriving to Kathmandu airport. How can it be a natural death? Either it should be an injury, either it should be some serious illness. How can a person 20 years old die naturally?
20 years old.
Of course.
Yeah.
Now,
Pause. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Short of having some kind of precondition for a heart attack, I think it's quite rare for somebody that young to, because it's what they're saying, cardiac arrest and things like this. It suggests to me that the Qatari government may be lying about the cause of death here. I don't know what you guys think, but
and the cause could potentially be I'm instantly thinking of getting overworked in the heat, especially. What do you call it? Your
heat stroke, dying of heat stroke.
What do you call it? Forced like to work more hours than necessary because like the muscles and the body in the body itself, like you start, the body starts to fall down if you're overworking physically, especially, and then you also have issues such as well. Again, I could be wrong. It could also be punishment, physical punishments too. Consistent physical punishments. I would not be surprised of those.
I
well.
mean, I've read reports and stuff of the physical violence that goes on, and it also there could be a number of them that we know the safety conditions were poor. There were reports about that in the World Cup stadiums in terms of safety equipment and that kind of thing. So there's a number of different things it could be, but just dying of a heart attack at 20 seems unlikely.
Yeah. Very, very suspicious.
If we go beyond the death, if we try to explore the cause of death, what were the causes of death? What were the triggers that caused the complication? So the person died. The non-cardiac death, if we evaluate, then there are several work injuries, fall from height, there are poisoning, there are homesickness leading to depression and suicide
as well.
And this extreme atmospheric condition
Yeah.
where the workers work the day long, it causes dehydration.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It may cause heat stroke. It may cause massive dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and this may lead to death. Sweating is a defense mechanism. It cools the body. But when
this is the thing. I mean, just to pause it a second. I mean, part of the concern. I mean, they were worried that the players were going to get heat stroke, and you're talking about playing for 90 minutes. So you imagine working 10 hours a day every day in that heat. If you got concern for heat stroke of a single game of 90 minutes, then what's 10 hours a day going to do to you?
Yeah.
I mean, this was I remember reading, in the sources, or rather reading in some sort of history about the, slavery in the Ahwar region, or in southern Iraq during the Abbasid period. And they said that the life expectancy of a slave was 5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. And was it? It was due to like making them work outside in the heat for long hours.
Yes.
Oof. So wow.
And bearing in mind they've been doing this World Cup work for longer than 5 years, so
You know, a decade practically. So yeah, this could definitely cause a lot of injuries and a lot of deaths and collapses and whatnot. Oh,
Hot climate for a long duration of time, this mechanism, body mechanism fails. The sweating cannot cool down the body. So the temperature of the body rises, and this leads to several complications, which may later on cause death. Death may occur immediately at the spot,
wow.
or it may occur even hours and days
Yikes.
later.
Because their deaths are unexplained, not investigated properly. As a result, their families are denied of compensation. And also, they do not know how their near and dear one died in Qatar. It could be heat, and it could be because of the pressure. The suicide rate is also very high because they take loan. They must have a lot of mental pressure also.
Despite the danger, workers keep traveling to Qatar for the chance to work. Most come from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, also the Philippines, Kenya, Sudan, Uganda, and Nigeria, countries where jobs are scarce and poverty is rampant. In Nepal, one of Asia's poorest countries, 56% of households receive remittances from these workers abroad. That's more than half the country dependent on their income. The death of a family's main earner can be devastating. If a worker is deemed to have died due to his job, his family is compensated financially. But if his death certificate says he died of natural causes or other non-work-related reasons, the family gets nothing from the employer. And this is usually the case. Some say the worker hiring process, known as Kafala, is the heart of the problem.
Due to this Kafala system, which is also called sponsorship system, the workers were tied to their employers. They were not allowed to switch their jobs, and they were not allowed to leave the country without taking permission from the employer. As a result, migrant workers were forced to remain submissive to labor exploitation and abuses.
The Kafala system is a legal framework used in many Middle Eastern countries to help employers hire workers from abroad, usually for household help or manual labor, and puts the employer in charge of the workers' legal and visa issues. Under Kafala, workers need employers' permission to enter the country, stay in the country, change jobs, and leave the country. It's a system so ripe for abuse that one Nepalese diplomat referred to Qatar as an open jail. Human Rights Watch said some of the abuses could amount to modern slavery. Years of criticism of harsh working conditions, low or no pay, and deportations because employers withheld documents led Qatar to implement reforms starting in 2017 and officially dismantle the Kafala system. Among the improvements have been a set minimum wage.
I did read about this recently that apparently, they have started with reforms and officially kind of taken down this system. I don't know how true that is in terms of whether this has been confirmed independently by Human Rights Watch or Amnesty or anybody like that. I can imagine. I mean, at least if it has exposed it that much that it does bring some reforms, you can say there's a bit of a silver lining to that cloud. But I mean, what a high price to pay for it.
Yes, a thought occurred to me.
Yeah.
I mean, these, if they aren't paying anything if they die of natural causes, could it be that they actually murder the workers? Ooh. I hope not, because that would be kind of even extreme.
Ooh.
Well, I've heard of just casual violence from those that are running this system and the parts of the employers.
That I can believe, but I just threw out the thought there. But I don't think that, because that seems a bit extreme.
But keep in mind, Ginny, there have been reports of situations like that. I remember a Sri Lankan domestic worker, I believe it was Kuwait or one of the Gulf countries, was abused for like they were practically inserting her body with nails, with heated nails as punishment.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
like they were literally doing that. So you can imagine, I killing them or murdering them would not necessarily be far fetched if that can happen.
Well,
That
yeah,
would,
they're torturing people, then it
yeah,
shows how low they've already gone.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine an outright murder, if it is going on, would be rare. But yeah, it's
definitely torture is definitely a
Yeah,
thing.
but I was just wondering if there could exist some sort of mass scale murder fraud in order to not pay out salaries at the end of
Mhm. It
the
could be
terms.
sinister. It could be a sinister way to avoid paying those and then coming up
I
with
mean, it must not be direct murder. It can just be that they set them in such conditions that they collapse during work.
even poisoning too. Even poisoning as well can.
Yeah, that could happen, but I think that they simply work them to death in
Yeah,
order to not pay out.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah, maybe.
It could be. I don't know, and I wouldn't, accuse anyone of this because that's kind of extreme, and I don't think it's likely. But
Yeah,
still,
we
over
can't.
6,000 deaths.
Yeah, and
That
we can't rule out that possibility. You are correct. We cannot rule it out. Uh, yeah, and it's alarming. You're right, Ginny. It's very alarming. The death rate. Let's
Age 1,000 Qatar.
and drastic. I know you brought up the reforms. I have an article by Amnesty that says that the reforms were really just basically just for show. If anything, the reforms have been minimum. And again, keep in mind this is from 2020, but we'll take a look at that report.
Reals a month, about $275, and a stipend for food and housing. That standard appears to be generally upheld. Workers officially no longer need their employer's permission to travel or change jobs. But many people say they still need to seek that permission, often for fear of retribution. Others who want to leave can't, as they owe large sums of money to lenders who help them pay recruitment companies. And they still have no right to join unions or participate in strikes. 3 months before the Games, a local advocacy group reported 60 workers were detained, some of whom were deported for protesting unpaid wages, according to the Associated Press. The Qatari government acknowledged arrests for breaching public safety laws, but declined to provide details.
So in the paper, like Kafala has been like dismantled, but in terms like if you see the practicality, like but still it exists in Qatar. So in my opinion, we think that FIFA and Qatar they should establish a fund comprehensive program to provide remedy to the migrant worker who face exploitation and abuses for last 12 years and that went unaddressed. And it should not be limited to migrant workers who work in stadiums or like in the training site, but also like other workers who were deployed in preparation or for delivery of the tournament. We continue to receive cases from migrant workers through phone calls or through emails complaining about like they have not been paid for last few months, and also like some workers they complained of they were underpaid or they were not paid for overtime.
यहाँ काम नपाएर यस्तो गर्नुपर्छ, नत्र हामीहरूको पनि त्यस्तो हुन्छ कि गाउँमै बसो, देशकै लागि केही गरौँ, देशमै काम गरौँ, देशमै खाऊ, गाउँकै लागि केही गरौँ। अब गएपछि आई थिङ्क मिनिमम 2 साल 3 साल त बस्छु, त्यसपछि आएपछि अलि के गर्छु अब सोच्छु। अब घरमा आमा हुनुहुन्छ, बुवा हुनुहुन्छ, दाइ हुनुहुन्छ ठुलो, अनि दाइहरूले नै अहिलेसम्म मलाई जे गरिरहेछ उहाँहरूलाई सपोर्ट गर्नु। अब उहाँहरू अब गर्नुपर्छ। हजुर, अब काम गर्ने जान्छन्, अब काम गर्दाखेरि केही एक्सिडेन्ट भयो भने
विदेश गेलै कहलकै धिया पुता सब छोट छोट रहे ने, तब ओकरे सबके लागि अब गेली ने, कथी खुअते ओकरा सबके दिन दिन के कहै छै। ऊ काम ओकरा ऊपरी अथी सब करी रही छलिए नेता से ऊपरी चढ़ी छलिए ऊ अथी सब करी छलिए दाल मसाला सब लके नहीं जाई ऊपरी बनबी सबके राते में मृत्यु भयली हमरा सबके भोर में सुबह में था भइली फोन कल के दूसरे आदमी तब चल वहाँ मृत्यु भयली नहीं त हम 15 दिन में ले लहास अथी कहियन काज क्रिया कैली अभी पैसा अब कत से खेत छले कट्ठा तो उहे बेच लिए तब धियापुता के खीबी छी कथी करबी नहीं छलिए दोसर दोसर गांव के लोग मोर छलिए
यहाँ तो 6 किलो धान थियो अर्को मान्छे हेर्दाखेरि त्यो पनि भने थियो कि म जाने म भनिरहेको थियो नजानु त्यो अर्को मान्छेले सापट्टि लिएर अनि उहाँ मैले पठायो त्यसको सापट्टि जना कर्जा भयो उहाँहरू भने थियो प्राइमर रङ पोइन्ट अनि उहाँ गएर त्यही बेलचामा राखिदियो ऊ त भने थियो गाह्रो छ त्यो ठक मान्छे त ठक्यो गाह्रो छ म उहाँबाट म आउँछु भने मैले भनेको आज सर्छ भोलि सर्छ कति दिनमा हुन्छ पैसा त थोरै दिन्छ 300 कि कति उहाँको 300 रुपियाँ दिइरहेछ उहाँको महिनाको लेबरमा त त्यसले त बिस्तारै बिस्तारै सधाएर म आउँछु उसले भनेछ त्यो सधायो नि अब म अब आउँछु छिटो आउनुहोस् मैले भनेको त त्यसको त नम्बर थियो त्यहीँबाट फोन गर्यो उसले जित्ने दिथ्यो अनि अचम्म पर्यो
के कारण भयो कि घरको कर्जा धेरै थियो माथि कर्जाबाट परेशान गर्दै थियो मेरो यो दाइले पासपोर्ट बनाएर भनेको के कतरैमा काम गर यहीँ बस्छु मेरो भाइले बोलाएर लिएर गयो कतर 3 सालमा यो नेक्स्ट महिना यसको टिकट ओके थियो भन्छ म जान्छु आज दिनमा बात गरेको रातिमा भोलि 4 बजे डेट
and they are forced to work for a longer period during the daytime. They are more exposed to the outdoor heat. The living condition is poor. The health system is not that good that it should be. So all these factors are causing the rise in death in these workers.
I mean, sorry, Moose, just to pause it for a second.
Yeah.
Also, just it's best to do a little bit of commentary so you don't get a copyright claim, you know.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was just going to say, what's sad about this is that, and I think it mentioned it in a previous graphic, that you still get huge numbers who are trying to get into Qatar to take up the work, and it goes to show that you know there's not going to be any pressure from the governments in India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, all the places, Nigeria, etc., where the workers come from, because despite the deaths and despite the misery, they still know that so many people were dependent on it, and so all the chaos that's caused, you know, the Qatari government will come under no real pressure from the governments of these countries to look after the workers better, because at the end of the day, they'll take that hit for all the remittances that they're still getting. I mean, like I think it said Nepal was, what was it, 56% of families get remittances. So it's like it will just be seen as, well, it's just something you've got to suck up. And so in that sense, maybe there will be, well, I mean, really, it's going to take more pressure from either wealthier countries or from the people like Amnesty shining a light on it. But it kind of gets me to my bigger point that the countries that have real power to affect a change on Qatar are the rich countries like Europe, like Canada and America and Australia, all the countries, particularly the countries that have teams that have gone there. And this is one of the things that really pisses me off, because you imagine how powerful it would have been if a single country from Europe has said, you know what, fuck you, we're boycotting, we're not going to go, we're not going to be a part of this charade. That would have been such a powerful protest. And yet, for all the virtue signaling and all the let's wear an armband here until we get threatened with a fine and then we won't do it anyway, and all the, you know, all this other nice flowery language, nobody had the courage to take a real hit and say, we're not going to show up for this World Cup. And that's really what they should have done. I mean, I would say England should do it. I mean, it's not, I mean, I've not been watching it. I've been boycotting myself, and I know England are doing garbage as usual. So, I mean, would England have lost anything in terms of playing? It's not like we're going to win the thing anyway. So, like, why not take a real stand and say we're not going to show up for this?
Yeah.
But none of them will do it.
I did a quick calculation when I compared the number of deaths to the total per capita of Qatar here, with the deaths, with the total involved, you know, states in the, you know, Israel-Palestine conflict during the worst years of that conflict.
And what was the comparison did you find?
You know, almost 4 times more deaths per capita.
In Qatar?
Yes.
What the fuck? Literally, what the fuck?
During the worst years.
Wow.
This makes me a kind of suspicious about these, you know, Guardian claims, because it seems so enormous.
No,
Keep
I
in
don't.
mind, at the same time,
but wait a second. Sorry, Moose. They got these figures from the governments, from the Indian government, the Bangladeshi government. These are all official state figures. So I'm not sure what motivation they would have to lie, considering that none of these governments, like I was just saying, none of them are putting any pressure on Qatar to reform their system. So it's not like I can't see why they would lie about those figures.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's true. It could, you know, be true also. I'm just saying that I didn't know that they were, you know, originally from the governments. I just thought that.
Yeah. They went and asked all the well, from what I remember in the article, there was at least, they asked the governments of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and possibly Nepal, and it might have been Philippines as well. I'm not sure if
Philippines. I think they also asked what do you call it, different human rights groups, like even local human rights watch groups as well.
Okay, right.
So,
I hope that this you know, one thing I think about is that they could, and now the Guardian is a, you know, newspaper, and the newspaper sometimes makes mistakes, but I hope that they have actually done a mistake here, where they have taken, you know, the total number of deaths of, you know, seasonal, you know, workers, or the, you know,
well, I mean,
in the entire region of, you know, the Gulf and the Arabic Peninsula, and not only Qatar.
No, I think it is just Qatar.
It is just Qatar, and it's just
holy shit.
Yeah, that's the alarming thing, Ginny.
I mean, this is worse than most active war zones.
Yeah, and this is just Qatar. We haven't even touched other Gulf countries as well, too.
Oh, I do think that Qatar is among the worst, though. Still.
And what's interesting, I think you also pointed it out earlier, either you or Drastic, is that the story we were hearing of one of the brothers, or one of the husbands, or one of the sons of the people, he just paid off his loans, he was about to come back, and he's suddenly dead. So this gets very suspicious too, like even the circumstances as well. Legally speaking, circumstantially speaking, it's very, very fishy that he just suddenly dies. And, you know, just on his way back. And they even like construct these reports that it was stomach failure, or was just, you know, based on, again, Qatar has a history of producing reports. false report status. They do have a history of that. Qatar, Kuwait are one of the bigger culprits, as well as I would even argue Saudi Arabia, of course. So yeah, these are alarming numbers. You are correct. I know. I hope the numbers are incorrect. Like, I know you're saying it from a more compassionate voice, that you're hoping that the numbers are lower from a compassionate stance. But
Yeah.
it does.
Well,
like
to be fair though, the Qatari government has not actually questioned the 6,500 figure. They have not said that was not true. All that they've said is that it was not all related to the World Cup stadiums. That's all they've said.
Yeah, and they've
They're
claimed
not
But it's
dispute.
still death rates on Fallout Wars, Total
Yeah,
War
even
scale.
Well,
if it's
yeah,
not.
no, it's important. As I think I've said it twice already now. I mean, they think that's some kind of an argument. Yes, let's assume that they're not all part of the World Cup. That does not mitigate the situation or make it any better. That just means that they've died on some other horrible project or whatever. It still shows how bad the conditions are.
I
But the
mean,
fact
I know
is,
that things were very bad during early industrialization, but I don't think it was ever this bad.
well, I don't know, but I mean, the fact that Qatar has not questioned the total figure, they've only questioned how much is related to the World Cup, shows that if all the governments that have provided the figures are they're saying it's true, and the Qatari government is not denying the overall figure, then I'm pretty confident to trust it.
I mean, I could just be overblowing this because I am not that into the field of work deaths and such.
Mhm. Oh, and they're very.
So
I've also worked at accident claims, right, with worker accidents, and as a paralegal. And what's interesting is that even in Canada, injuries, work-related accidents, and injuries are very common, and there's many, many, many claims. Um, even just an accident of a worker slipping, and literally like have situations where the slip and fall, or a sharp item just cut them. They had to have surgery, replacement for they had to get compensation, or
Well, that's a great point. I mean, bearing in mind that this figure is just the fatalities. We're
Mhm.
not talking about. I mean, how many tens of thousands of permanent injuries have probably been caused on top of that?
Yeah.
It's quite frightening to think about, as you say, because a lot of workplace injuries they're going to range from kind of minor injuries to things like you might lose a finger, you might lose an eye, you might get a permanent back injury. I mean, there's all sorts of permanent and as the lady saying, there's no compensation. That, I mean, how many workers will never be able to work again because of injuries they picked up? We don't even have the figures for that.
Yeah, we don't even have it's ironic, we don't have the injury figures, but we have the death figures. So this is what could be also alarming too. Like, and Ginny brought this point up. What if they're actually on purpose getting them killed, so to not pay them compensation for the injury?
Because again, I'm not that knowledgeable about work deaths and how common they are, especially in more environments of laxer standards. If I had, for example, the statistics from the 19th century in the various industrializing European countries, and they were comparable to these, maybe then this isn't such a huge deal. It's just a case of bad working conditions generally being a result of
That sounds like a video. It sounds like a video project for your channel, Culture.
I know.
Yeah, I have to look this up because this isn't my field really of expertise that much. So I will have to look it up. But this could be a result of just generally, third world, standards of workers,
But you say
environment.
third world. I mean, how rich Qatar is.
Yes,
I mean,
Qatar is extremely rich, but you have to remember that it's still, culturally and in many regards,
Yeah.
structurally or still on that level in structures to ensure
Oh
things.
yeah, of course, yeah.
So that could be a result, and then you should pressure them to be changed. But the matter of this could be normal. I'm just saying in the best case, but it could also actually be a much worse case. And my gut feeling, but I could be wrong, is that this is actually worse than what is normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine is too. I would assume it is because Qatar's got such a bad reputation. But yeah, it'd be an interesting thing to confirm either way.
Yeah.
Crack on with the last bit.
Yeah. Let's just see the last bit. Whoops.
He was very good.
गाउँमा होइन हाम्रो गाउँ चाहिँ धेरै नै सुन्दर छ मलाई धेरै सुन्दर लाग्छ मलाई गाउँ छोडेर जानु मन छैन कहीँ जानु मन हुँदैन गाउँमा बस्दाखेरि अब गाउँमा साथीहरूसँग फुटबल खेल्न चाहन्छु फुटबल मेरो मन पर्ने खेल हो
This is this is always a typical response that they would decline to interview any interview request, but issue a statement like this. It's always, I've seen this always the case.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, let's be honest. They're not going to come out and say, "Yeah, you know what? Yeah, we really are that fucking reckless with people's lives. We love our slave migrant population." Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Technically they aren't slaves. They're just bonded labor for
indentured servant, I think would be
indentured servitude. Technically it's still it isn't slavery because it's everything is due to debt and through contracts that were signed by the parties involved. Never mind that the death rates here are on such a level that I think that most types of slavery were actually better than this.
I know, it's so ironic. Wow.
The thing is, I could probably imagine somebody like Hijab or Ali Dar or anyone who's kind of promoting Sharia will say, well, look, this just proves that they weren't doing their slavery properly. If they were doing it the proper Islamic way, then these migrants would have it. They'd be living it large. They'd be enjoying all sorts of benefits. So
arguably, I would say probably if you not to the Iraq or the Yemeni area, but if you go to the slavery in the northwestern Africa, I would generally say as long as you weren't galley or mining slaves, you were probably had probably a better working conditions than these people.
Yeah,
for most of history.
Wow.
Yeah, well, who knows? But it's it's pretty damn horrible, isn't it?
Yeah. Let's see. Is there any more towards the end? They just say, "Oh yeah, this is a new claim." They just say 3 people.
I knew it. 3 people. Yeah, I see. Yeah. I knew I saw that figure somewhere.
Yeah. Since
I don't believe that for a moment.
Yeah, this is. Just prior to the World Cup, Qatar removed hundreds of workers from Doha. Yeah, they were sent back home. They have been given adequate. Critics say Qatar tried to remove the spotlight from the migrant workers during the tournament.
Yeah, but Moose, this is the same thing as went on in Brazil, where they were clearing out the Brazilian slums that were going to be near the stadiums, and they were doing it quite violently. It's kind of like we'll just make sure that the world's cameras can't see the horrible conditions that are going on. So this does not surprise me at all.
Yeah, because I think Brazil, what it wanted to do was like, kind of, yeah, like you were saying, sort of like brush it under the rug, the class differentiation, because I know Brazil was getting this huge endorsement, like, oh, it's one of the growing economies and blah blah blah, and it was becoming the next superpower or something like that.
Have any one of you read One Piece?
Well, Brazil.
The manga.
Brazil has got a large economy just because it's got a very large population. But when you look at on a per capita basis, there is still an incredible amount of poverty in Brazil. And that was not a side that FIFA, that doesn't look good on the FIFA promotional material. That you've got all these desperate kind of people living in shantytown conditions. That does not look good for the tourists. So yeah, they just swept them all away, literally. It was pretty. It was kind of almost what's the term for it? I can't say it's gentrification, but worse than that, it was almost kind of like social cleansing or something. Get rid of all the poor people. But sorry, carry on.
That's okay. Okay, let me just see if there's any other. Wait, Sepp
Blatter called it a mistake.
Yeah. The selection of Qatar.
I mean, what an understatement.
What a dumbass. Like, you could have had the power to reject this. All right, so I think this is done.
I mean, it was a good video. I think it's important to get some of those personal stories and see that it's not even just the migrants, but how many families are going to be in such difficulty as a knock-on effect from all these workers being abused or dying. So yeah, good video. I thought so.
Oh, and also this is something that I found with Amnesty International. This was a report that they had about the Kafala. Let's see here. Yeah, so reality check 2021. Basically, the state of migrant workers. So this was during the countdown, and the report was generated in the years 2021. What Qatar has done so far. Because what they promised was, according to the agreement, international labor agreement, improved payment of wages, labor inspection, replacement of the Kafala system, improving labor recruitment procedures, increased prevention, protection, prosecution against forced labor, promotion of workers' voice. But then, what have they done so far? Since 2017, to introduce legislation aimed at benefiting migrants. These include domestic workers law, committee settlement of dispute, a fund, non-discriminating new minimum wage, ending the exit permit, the NOC requirements, rallying. But someone says, the security guard said, change came on paper, but on the ground it has not changed. When you go inside the company and among the workers, you see that only a very small changes happen. It's appalling. So the process claim unpaid, the dues in court remains laborious, even fruitless. Wage theft remains rampant. So there was, so the Kafala, the promise was that they would end restrictions, authorize workers leave employment, and review procedural issuing exit visas, enforce prohibition. But in August 2020, Qatar finally repealed the requirement to obtain an exit permit and no objection certificate for most workers, allowing them to leave the country and move jobs, both considered central pillars. While this was an important step, our de facto NOC processes emerged and problematic elements of Kafala remain in place. This include, for instance, the ability for employers to control migrant workers' legal status on top of the array of retaliatory measures that abusive employers can use anytime without fear of punishment. So for Sarah, a domestic worker, a little has changed. So she says, the changing a job in Qatar is so difficult. True, there's no NOC law, but most companies' employers are still asking for one. Unluckily, current employer, don't want to give me one, and they say they will send me back to the Philippines. I've received a lot of job offers, but my problem is that they are still needing NOC or release papers or resignation letters signed by my previous sponsor. It is much safer if the employees have the NOC or release papers. So they still need to go through this legal process. Even though the exit permit has cracked, there are still like different gaps. So yeah, so there's still like, this is an entire report. Let me send you guys the link. It's a pretty lengthy report. about the barriers that still exist. Change in contracts. So there was, so yeah, so there was, but they failed. The method they got message saying there were many who wanted to change the job, but they failed. The method was that they got a message saying rejected, but about 100 could apply, but they only approved 5 or so. So yeah, there's an entire report on this. Let me just
might be worth putting that in the chat as well. Actually,
yeah. Let me put this in the chat as well, so that way you guys can take a look at this report. So this was from Amnesty International, and yeah, so for quite a lengthy report. Yeah, even harder to leave for domestic workers. So they cover different issues of domestic workers and those even working in the stadium, and different stories too. We have more stories. So these stories keep popping up of like abusive practices and retaliation and whatnot. So we have tons and tons of these stories. So
no, it's a useful resource. That's good. I mean, it's clear to me that Qatar are they're just going to try and run down the clock, and they'll make superficial gestures to say that there's change. And as soon as the tournament ends, they'll if any of these changes are lasting, even the superficial ones, I'll be quite surprised. I think once the spotlight is off, they'll go back to their previous
go back to their original roots, or they'll just go back.
Because I mean, Amnesty and human rights, you know, they have the advantage that the spotlight's on them, so they can put more pressure. But it's only going to last for the range of the tournament. So unless you manage to get some permanent change before the middle of December, I can't see anything really improving. Sad to say. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that's just cynicism on my part. But well,
you're not far off. You're not far off.
Well, it kind of goes back. I mean, I know we've only got like 10 minutes left or something, but I just thought to bring it back to some of the other, particularly in relation to Islam, which is obviously some of the problem. I mean, I'm not saying the workers' rights thing is necessarily about Islam. I mean, you get that in lots of places, but some of the other issues that have come up in the World Cup, things like gay rights, women's rights, stuff like that, which are directly related and are still important issues, I think. I mean, I've heard I've read statements coming out from just saying, look, we're not going to change our religion for the next few weeks for you, so just suck it up. And I was thinking, in one way, it's like, well, yeah, what do you expect them to say? I mean, why did FIFA pretend that they would be able to instigate some kind of significant social changes by putting a World Cup there? They backed off of everything in terms of the whole, protesting for gay rights and stuff, and calling out the treatment of women. But they know what Qatar is as a country, and this is another reason why I was saying things like it would have been better to go to a more liberal place like Tunisia or Turkey or something like that. Because Qatar is what it is, and in a way, I don't really blame Qatar for that. I mean, I blame it obviously it's a regressive regime, and strict Islam or enforcement of Islam is a bad thing there. But FIFA are not stupid. They knew what they were getting into, and they just did not give a shit. And I think that's pretty damning. So all these kind of superficial gestures around inclusivity and diversity and everything else that goes on, it showed that they had one concern, and it was money, and money won, and it didn't matter what the hell else was going on. And I think it's given a legitimization to Qatar and to that kind of restrictive Islam that it didn't deserve. What you should have said is, if you're going to live by these rules, then you don't get the World Cup.
Yeah.
That's how you do.
And
sorry,
and
ran over.
On the other hand, I don't want, I don't want sports to become, a political sledgehammer, except in very extreme cases, which are even more extreme than what we saw here in Qatar.
Yeah, this is an extreme case.
I would say that. You could say that, but then FIFA spends so much time in their propaganda talking about diversity and inclusion, and we're fighting prejudice around the world and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's corporate bullshit.
Well, they should make up their mind. Either they are completely neutral and they won't talk about anything, and then give it to whatever monstrous dictatorship you want, or you can actually be consistent and stick to those values and don't give the World Cup to places like Qatar. choose one or the other. Don't have this bullshit middle ground where basically you pretend to complain and then go there anyway just for the money. It's just so hypocritical.
And what's interesting is that in Qatar, on top of the rights thing, there's also the free speech as well. You cannot say anything against the Qatari government, or you could get arrested. And apostasy, there's blasphemy issues as well too. Like these carry death sentences. Even going against the government can carry death sentences as well too. So keep in mind, the reason we brought this up was because there was some tie-in with, because it's an Islamic country hosting a World Cup. And also we were surprised to discover that the Kafala does have its weird origins in Islamic Sharia, weirdly enough. Now,
I'd like to know more about that because
Yeah,
they didn't really
same
specify
here.
too much in the document,
yeah,
did they?
because
How
I
that
think in the article they didn't want to go too much into the detail because they didn't want to upset or come across as, let's face it, Islamophobic, you know? So I do want to go into that because I didn't know that there might be some origins in there. So
I mean, this Kafala is a kind of a guarantee ship, or you know,
like a
bondsman in a contract, a
uh-huh.
kafil.
Yeah. So if anything, there might be origins. I believe maybe in the Rashidun Caliphate, probably. There might be origins.
I mean, it's most of these laws were developed during either late Umayyad period or during the Abbasid period. So,
But keep in mind the Pact of Omar, the second caliph, for example.
yeah, but
They have
I
listed
think that if we are going to find any kind of concrete
Yeah.
thick precedent for this, then we will see it during that period. But
Yeah,
but I mean, this is more. I don't think that this actually has that much to do with Islam. I just think that this is a case of a very predatory government, just generally.
But keep in mind, there could be. We'll have to see what the scholars say, what the Islamic jurisprudence says, quote unquote, even what verses. So I'd actually like to look into that.
Yeah, but if you want brutal abuse of workers, then slavery is the way to go, not this sort of debt bondage.
So it could also have its origins in indentured servitude plus or slavery as well. So,
yeah, but indentured servitude in the kind of debt bondage way doesn't really exist due to various reasons. I mean, you could sell yourself to pay a debt in slavery, but that would be then your official status is as a slave on an في وقت موقوت, or a timed time, or a مقدود, or a limited time.
Yeah,
you're not you have a status that is kind of like debt bondage, but it's actually slavery, but you're limited slavery.
Yeah, and this was there were like weird tiers of like tiers in the sense of the hierarchy of slavery. That is like
yes,
worse off,
but you are a slave because you can be sold without your own consent during this time. In more regular debt bondage, you can deny to sell your debt to one other, but you will have then to pay with worse.
And keep in mind, in this case though, with the kafala, what was surprising is sponsors had sold the visa. In the article we were covering, sponsors sold the visa of their workers to other companies as well.
Yes,
so they have been selling this, the workers themselves. It's practically almost a evolved form of selling the workers to another company without their consent. So, this gets quite the deep rabbit hole.
That is getting pretty close to slavery.
Yeah,
that is slavery, but that I do still think that the kafala, the guarantee is still separate as a judicial person from the judicial
it has
entity
a minor
from the person.
Legal difference. Keep in mind, I think what you're saying is minor legal difference.
In practice, I would actually argue that this is actually worse than most types of slavery, but that's another discussion.
Yeah. But keep in mind, it just on paper, it's a different story altogether. But yeah, by the way, I think we're heading towards the end of the last minute. So any closing statements from you fine jinn and gentlemen?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. I mean, it's a horrible situation in Qatar. I think we covered it in good detail, and I'm carrying on boycotting the World Cup, and I encourage everyone else to do it. Fuck Qatar, fuck FIFA.
Yeah, and our jinn, our very cultured, well-mannered jinn.
Yeah, I must say that this is one of the few episodes where I've actually been legitimately terrified.
Yeah. And you
because just the
the manga.
implications, if these numbers are true, are horrifying.
Yeah, 6,500 deaths are very horrifying. And you pointed out that manga from One Piece. That,
One Piece, yes.
They would purge slums before the arrival of the world nobles.
Yes.
So, wow, it's damn. I actually did not. So I should definitely check out the One Piece manga to see like some parallels.
Yeah, but it's very far in it, so it will take a while. It's a very long series.
True, fair enough. But I'll definitely check it out. But thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining today. I won't do Discord today, but we'll definitely do something next week. I hope Nadir is okay, and I hope Nick Gill gets better. So definitely, we'll see you guys all next week. Thank you for having this discussion with me, and thank you for joining the Gin and Tonic Show. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone.
It's
Take care.
been a pleasure.